A new study out says people are more likely to share misinformation that sparks moral outrage. I think we've all seen it. All the posts on Facebook or the Face page and the Twitter and the Instagram, you see them and you read the headline, and that's all it is a headline generally. And it's generally poorly written, might I point out. And you read it and you go, oh, and you immediately go to repost it. And then you stop and you go, wait a second here. Maybe this is not the best idea. That's what you should be doing. You should have a social media like throttle where you can pull back on the throttle a little bit before you just start aimlessly sharing information that makes you upset. We are joined this afternoon by an expert on branding and trust. His name is Scott Baradell. And Scott, thanks so much for your time this afternoon. We certainly appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So this is kind of an interesting situation that we've got here. Misinformation that evokes moral outrage and social media posts that contain that in comparison to trustworthy information, like the virility of it, I guess, is what is so astounding. Like information and posts that cause moral outrage, absolutely just huge astronomical numbers when it comes to the sharing of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you can trace it back to a century ago with yellow journalism and the idea that in news and newspapers, if it bleeds, it leads, and drawing people to things that were outrageous and accuracy was a secondary consideration. And then we go to Google with clickbait. And today, to your point on social media, it's all about rage bait. It's all about something that's going to get somebody interacting with the content, whether it's true or not.
And, sometimes that misinformation is just information that isn't reported in what's actually posted, right? They conveniently leave a few things out, right? And it's basically selective editing.
Yeah, exactly. And people are like, oh, is this right or not? And then they go check it, and then they come back and they comment and say, this is wrong, and here's why. And it feeds right into what the creator wants, which is people talking about it, because that's what gets more people to see it.
As the expression we use around here, an outrage ensues, basically, is what it comes down to.
That's right.
So what are we learning from this study? I mean, what is the study telling us right now?
Well, I mean, if you want to get to kind of the basics of it, we're talking about, evolution and of man and how we've all been taught from over years of evolution to look out for negative things or risks or bad things or things we needed to worry about. And most of the stuff that gets shared and that spurs outrage is along those lines. It's not, puppy dogs and things like that. Although I guess cat videos have gone viral, but it's mainly things that are drawing our natural gaze toward the negative.
So let me ask you this. Are people knowingly sharing misinformation because they know they're going to get the interaction, and it's really the interaction that they're looking for and not so much the sharing of this information?
I think in many cases, definitely. I think for, say, creators on social media that have built big followings and are trying to build followings, they know that they have to maintain at least credibility with their audience. But at the same time, they're trying to gig up views and engagement by posting things that are controversial. And sometimes how you tell the story is done intentionally to get people to argue about it. And that's very common.
So do you think this has been heightened with the easy ability to monetize things now, for people to become monetized?
Yeah, absolutely. TikTok in particular is monetized based on views. I will say, and my wife happens to actually be a pretty big TikTok person on the subject of baking bread, which is something she does. And I can tell you that she's done things like making dough on a plane while she's flying overseas. And it was controversial because people were saying, you shouldn't do that, it's going to bother people and all these things. She knew it would be controversial, but she thought it would be fun. Well, this thing gets so many views, and TikTok pays for every one of them. So it's hard to argue with that.
And when there's a payday attached, people are willing to look the other direction, aren't they?
Well, I mean, it is capitalism.
Hey, listen,
that's our system.
I am all for it. I am all for the capitalist society, right? The pro-capitalism. So I think it's great. I think the problem is that it's like what we were just talking about. Like when people are craving interaction, which I would argue that interaction used to come in human form before social media. right? And I think maybe that's what the bigger story is here is social media has taken away the human interaction in life.
Yeah, and it's made us much more crass towards each other and treat each other in ways that we wouldn't treat each other if we were in person. And I think it masks what's ultimately a lot of isolation and loneliness. Not to end your segment on a downer, but,
No,
but you're absolutely right.
So let me ask you, as a branding expert, as somebody who is that, I mean, that is your lifeline.
Yeah.
Are you surprised with how fast some of these online brands have taken off?
Yes, absolutely. Especially when it can be something very small. It can be a mom and pop thing. It can be a kid. It's really truly democratized the ability to start a business if you've got a good idea or you've got a good gimmick or you've got a good way to market it.
Yeah. You know, and the availability now of technology, and I don't just mean social media, but I mean, you know, platforms like the Adobe platform, the Adobe suite. And for people to be able to have basically user-friendly programs to create really high-quality content. And now with the introduction of AI, you know, how do you see that? How do you see artificial intelligence kind of changing the branding world?
Well, it's true. It's further democratized just the tools to produce something that looks professional. Now, it's not the same as being, say, trained as a journalist, but the truth is, people don't trust mainstream media. They're more likely to trust the people they follow every day who are posting every day on social media. And now that they have tools that can produce content that looks as good as what you see in mainstream media, it can be hard for them to tell the difference.
Right. You know, it was interesting because I think it was last week, and I think it was the National Press Association. I think he was the president or is the president of the National Press Association, went into an absolute meltdown at a conference or a luncheon or something along those lines about the fact that Elon Musk, posted on Twitter that we are the media now. And, this guy kind of went into it's hard to be a journalist and it's hard to be a reporter. And as someone who spent time as a reporter on the street chasing stories, I can say, it is a hard job. It's not necessarily a fun job. It's not an easy job. But at the same time, when trust in the media is at such an all-time low, people are going to turn somewhere for their information, right? I mean, social media is basically it.
Yeah. I mean, I started out in local news. I started out as a journalist, but at the same time, this guy's comments, I mean, I was like playing the world's smallest violin.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I didn't have a lot of sympathy for it. But the truth is, in terms of local media in particular, the biggest tragedy that has been probably really undercovered in the story is there's been a just tremendous loss of local news in markets that are mid-sized markets and smaller across the country. Many towns do not have a newspaper at all anymore.
No, and a lot of places that do have a newspaper, they've gone to a no print edition or a once a week print edition, and what you end up with is 2 or 3 local stories wrapped around a USA Today.
Yes, and then the other thing that's happened is you've had a couple of venture capital firms that have done things like establish these networks of quote-unquote local news sites, which are all produced out of one central location. They don't know anything about the communities they're supposedly producing news about.
The online world, I mean, it has created kind of a new form of journalism in a sense. I think that's probably fair to say, with a lot of the, like the smaller pop-up news websites that are more locally based, right? I think they all kind of started out like, I don't know if you're familiar with Creative Loafing, which was kind of same kind of concept, but they're online now. Those seem to be gaining so much more traction than the traditional, the USA Today's or the local, the Democrat and the Chronicle or whatever the newspaper is. Like ours, for instance, is the Asheville Citizen Times. Their kind of biggest competition in the print world now is a website called the AVL Watchdog, right? And AVL Watchdog is just a lot of old, a lot of people who used to work in newspaper and have moved to a different platform. That seems to be what is kind of killing the traditional newspaper business.
Yeah, you mentioned Creative Loafing. I worked for a publication like that in Dallas, where I live, called Dallas Observer, and it's still around. They have troubles with getting enough advertising and things like everybody else. But I think what these alternative weeklies had early on, and what some of the publications like what you're describing, have the attitude and the perspective which
Mm-hmm.
traditional news outlets have trained themselves not to have. Like, it's against ethics to have that attitude, except when it's on the editorial page, and that's not what people want anymore. And so, wherever they're getting their news and however they're getting it, they want it to be served with some spice, some opinion, and sometimes to generate outrage.
Right. Exactly. So they can get those clicks. It's all about the clicks and the interactions and the likes. Got to get those hits of dopamine in where you can get them, I suppose, right?
Exactly.
My guest today is Scott Baradell. He is an expert on branding and trust. He heads up Idea Grove, which is a full-service marketing company that has been helping companies and organizations tell their stories for nearly 2 decades. He's also the author of a book called Trust Signals, Brand Building in a Post-Truth World. Scott, any last thing you'd like to get in before we let you run?
Well, the last thing I'd say is, and it speaks to what I mean by a post-truth world, is there's not like Walter Cronkite, everyone believes as the arbiter of truth. It's the audience, and so whether it's outrage or whether it's approval or whatever it is, you got to please your audience.
There you go, Scott. Thanks so much for your time today. We certainly appreciate it.
Thank you.